Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Luiz. This is the progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. Remember, you can also send me a tweet to EGBERTOWILLIES. That is, at Egberto Luiz. Let us engage. It is politics done right.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Luiz, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. One more time, we are going to have a great show for you today. The first part of the show is going to be a continuation of the last show that we had, which was great. We know you had that excellent piece that we sort of deconstructed from Dr. Phelps, but I tell you what, it's better to have the person who wrote the piece on white evangelicals show up. And not only that, have a whole lot to say. So let's go ahead and get busy with the program. We're going to have a little alternate way in the way we do things today, because we'll do the blog of the week after Dr. Phelps is done with his part. So what is the program titled today? It's a two-part series today. The first part is going to be Professor Deconstructs Evangelicals' Lives, and the second part, Brazil, Lula imprisoned by the Plutocracy. But before we get started, I want to remind all our listeners right now that it's very important that you go ahead and share these programs immediately on Facebook. Go ahead and share it on your wall, share it on your page, tweet it, do everything. If you're listening on Blog Talk Radio as well, please remember to go ahead and tweet these programs. It is very important if we are going to really make a change in this country. Again, repeating, if we are going to make a change, you're the one who will be partially responsible for that change. But anyhow, we start. Today we start the show with Dr. Hollis Phelps, Assistant Professor of Interdisciplinary Studies at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, who wrote the article, Maybe It's Time to Admit That the Grotesque Caricature of White Evangelicals is the Reality, that we covered in the blog of the week on Friday's show. He could not appear on Friday, but guess what? We have better than what we had on Friday. We have him here today. After Professor Hollis, we will proceed to today's blog of the week. We discuss the travesty in Brazil as the same plutocracy that ousted President Dilma Rousseff, jailed former president and current presidential frontrunner Luiz Inácio Lula de Silva for fear of the certainty that the left would return to power. We do not follow foreign events as we should in America. Many times they represent realities that will be our own if we do not understand and learn from dynamics occurring in other countries, which we are fallen prey to. So folks, without further ado, El Señor Hollis Phelps, welcome to Politics Done Right, my friend.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Look, let me tell you, first of all, I was completely and entirely blown away by that piece that you wrote, so much so that not only did I attempt with my callers to deconstruct it, but we also placed it on dailycoast.com, the most progressive site in the country with the most users in the country, and they simply loved the article. So let's start a little bit about you first. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I currently teach at Mercer University in Penfield College in the Department of Liberal Studies, and prior to that I taught in the Department of Religion at the University of Mount Olive. And I have a PhD in religious studies, and I also do work in philosophy and philosophy of religion. But a lot of my writing and research focuses on the intersection of religion and politics and culture in the United States, but also globally in terms of depth. So
I think that is so important, because as I mentioned to you offline, when I come out here, and as much as I grew up a Christian, and as much as I was a lot into religion before I became a humanist, it doesn't have the gravitas as somebody who has studied it in detail. And having you on the program deconstructing what we have with white evangelicals it makes it that much more important for our viewership to hear. So why don't you tell me, first of all, who are these white evangelicals?
Well, white evangelicals are a huge portion of the population in the United States, and politically speaking, they're a very influential voting bloc. And so, especially as you saw in this last election, if you can get white evangelicals, if you can get their vote as a whole, you're not going to get every vote, of course, but if you can get their vote as a whole, then you can really swing a presidential election. And I think that if white evangelicals hadn't lined up behind Donald Trump, then Donald Trump wouldn't be president. I think he knew that going in, and he played it to his favor. And so white evangelicals are in large measure responsible for electing Donald Trump to the presidency.
Now, you made an interesting point in your article, and what I think is important about your article is that you don't fall into the trap that somehow Donald Trump made these guys. I think in your article you pointed out that these guys were in existence long before, and not only that, but their ideology and their seeking of power has always been there. So why don't you elaborate some on that?
Well, what we have with Donald Trump isn't a new phenomenon. And I think that if you could sort of read the writing on the wall, it wasn't surprising that they lined up behind Donald Trump. White evangelicals in the United States, at least the way I read them, they constitute primarily a political movement. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that religion and politics are never separate entities. And we have to read them politically in that sense as well. And at least since the moral majority, though I think you can trace it back before that as well, white evangelicals in the United States have wanted power, and they have a very particular vision of what the United States should look like. And for them, that should be a Christian nation, in quotation marks, I should put that. And for them, that means a very conservative nation with very conservative social values and policies that reflect those values. And Donald Trump, in that sense, gave them precisely what they wanted. They're not interested in electing a moral figure who's going to be some sort of moral exemplar that they can pattern their lives after. They're interested in someone who is going to give them what they want. And what they want, at least this time around on my reading, is so-called religious freedom, which is just a euphemism for denying certain people their rights. And they're also looking long-term at stacking the courts, especially the Supreme Court. They see vacancies, and they see vacancies opening up during Trump's administration. And that's the game they're playing. It's political calculation, but the movement is, I would say, precisely based on political calculation.
So, in other words, I want to do two things. I want to read you an excerpt from your article, but also
Sure.
I think there's something that you're saying in that they want to stack the courts, etc. The courts, I think, is the only department or the only part of our government which is only democratic at the time of appointment, but after appointment, it is no longer democratic. It is a freewheeling part of our government. The separation of powers really isn't that it really isn't that fair between the three branches of government. Now, you said the following: evangelicals put great stock in the Bible, but as others have noted in the Trump context, the Bible is full of stories of God choosing morally ambiguous and even repulsive individuals to lead the so-called faithful. Indeed, that narrative line, repeated over again in numerous ways, make up a significant portion of what most Christians refer to as the Old Testament. Another way to put the matter is to say that the Bible isn't all about love, and how you relate to your neighbor, as Christians of a more liberal bent seem to assume privately and then and when they enter the public sphere. Are you also saying that, in effect, these guys are saying the Bible give them a right to be evil at times?
I don't know if I would put it precisely in those terms, but I think that they would recognize at least a right to some sort of moral ambiguity, which some people might want to label as evil. I mean, as I say in the piece, and I'll go ahead and state it here, I'm not an evangelical, and if I had to throw my hat in with someone, it would be liberal Christians. But I think where liberal Christians go wrong is they tend to reduce the biblical narratives to this narrative of love that culminates in the person of Jesus. And the problem with that is that the Bible is way more complex than that. There are numerous narrative lines in the Bible. They don't all adhere together into some neat and tidy whole. And the Bible, yes, has portions that are about love, but there are also portions about political calculation, about some figure who we might want to label as evil, rising up to deliver God's people. I mean, if you just look at the narrative, I always think of the person Samson, right, in the book of Judges. I mean, Samson's held to be this great, outstanding individual. And even if you look at kids' Bibles, he's pictured as a strong, muscular person that children should emulate and so on and so forth. But if you read his story, he's a horrible individual. He lies, he cheats, he commits genocide. He's not someone you would want to hold up as a moral example. Yet, according to the narrative, he does God's will. And so there is, in the Bible, some sort of support for this line of thinking. I'm not saying I agree with that line of thinking. I don't. But there is some sort of support. So I think it's wrong to just dismiss evangelicals as being unbiblical in their support for Donald Trump, as a lot of liberal Christians tend to do. I think that misses the ambiguity of the Bible itself, but also the ambiguity of politics.
It's interesting because I've always spoken about the Bible, parts of the Bible being, when people, I'm a humanist, so I don't, a Christian turned humanist. So I listen to all sides. And when people were attacking the Quran, what I told them is, hey, the Bible have parts that,
exactly,
that looks similar to the Quran. Now, the thing about it is, I knew that, but somehow I never internalized that in my in my confrontations with, let's say, the right. And after reading your piece, that is immediately what hit me. It almost codified that. Come on, progressives. Come on, liberals. The argument against these people cannot be they're not being biblical, because, in fact, they can show a portion of what they're doing as being biblical. And I think that is what was so resounding in your piece, because you looked at it objectively from 1,000 feet up, and people were able to see, wait a minute, that is the reason why we can't get to them. That's the reason why they're so immutable. So, first of all, I want to thank you for that piece. What I want to ask you, oh yeah, go ahead, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm glad that resonated with you, because that's one of the main things that I wanted to do with the piece, and I've written about it in a few other pieces as well, is that you can't just dismiss this line as unbiblical. But I would also add, I think it's unfortunate that we're in a political situation where we constantly have to justify things in terms of the Bible. And so I think that's a problem too, and we shouldn't have to do that. If people want to, that's fine, but we shouldn't constantly have to go back to, is this biblical or not, to try to make political arguments.
Exactly, because it's biblical, it's Quranical, it's whatever.
Right.
What do they call the laws from the Quran again?
Sharia.
Yeah. The thing about it is, you're right. I think you capture that perfectly, and that is, we shouldn't have to go back to some moral book or religious book to determine what we as people know are best for humans or best for the citizens of our country. We should just know something is good or has great outcomes, or they don't. And that
doesn't mean we can't glean any sort of insight out of these texts. I think we can, but we're also living in a completely different context than they were written in. So,
You know, you opened up a little can of worms by saying that, because the same way you say that about the Bible is the same way I constantly talk when we are trying to push certain parts of our progressive agenda. It's the same thing I push about the Constitution. These items were written in different times, so we we cannot verbatim follow these guys. I think the Supreme Court did great jobs at times when they actually got the spirit of the Constitution, but not the letter of the Constitution with regards to several policies out there. So let me ask you then, where do we go from here? What do you think? For progressives, how should they mitigate the problem that is at this point in our history, the what I would call the evangelical problem?
I would first say I don't think you can argue with evangelicals over this. And I don't think you can label them as hypocrites or anything like that. That's the normal strategy that's taken. That was the strategy that was taken by 95% of the pieces written about evangelicals following Donald Trump. They were called hypocrites for supporting Trump and so on and so forth. The problem is that no one views themselves as a hypocrite. And so the charge is sort of empty. But I think you, in a way, have to play their own game. And what I mean by that is that evangelicals and the right in general, I think, are really good at garnering support and stirring up people's emotions. And Donald Trump played on that. I mean, I know it's common to label Donald Trump as someone who's not very bright and unhinged and so on and so forth. But I think on his part, that's all calculated. He knows who he's playing to, and he knows how to win their emotional favor. And whether we like it or not, politics is based in large measure on that emotional response. And I think progressives need to learn from that we need to have candidates that appeal emotionally to people, that are charismatic in that sense. And I think we also have to recognize that politics is a fight. Politics isn't all about getting along and coming to some sort of middle ground. Politics is about asserting your position. And that's what evangelicals have been doing for a very long time, and the right in general have been doing for a very long time, and they've been successful at doing that. And so I think that if we really, progressives really agree with the policies that we think are good for everyone, then we have to fight hard like that as well, and not sort of cede that ground, and recognize that politics is conflictual at its very nature, and the Democrats just haven't been good at that, and they're not being good at it right now either. They're about to fall into the same trap as they did in the last election. And if they don't take the right seriously, and if they don't take Donald Trump and his supporters seriously and how they play the game in that sense, they will lose again.
Dr. Hollis Phelps, I can't think of a better way to end this segment. Those are words progressives. Those are words Democrats better listen to. Thank you so kindly for having been.
Thank you so much for having me on. I
Have a
appreciate
great
it.
day now.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Folks, I hope you heard that. I hope you heard Dr. Phelps' warning. It is something I think we've been saying for quite some time now, but again, having the numbers behind it, I think it's that much more important. Anyhow, folks, please do remember this is a call-in show. The telephone number is 646-716-5812. Again, that number is 646-716-5812. Do you have any questions that you want to ask? Do you want to change the direction of this show, what we're going to talk about? Please give us a call. If you're just joining the show, please do remember to go ahead and share this show immediately as you come in, because that is the way we get throughput on Facebook, by just sharing this on your wall, sharing this on your page, or even tweeting our program. I haven't made my pitch yet. I want to ask those of you who want to ensure that progressive media continues and real analysis continue. I ask you to go to patreon.com/politics done right and become a member, become a subscriber of Politics Done Right. Again, that is patreon.com/politics done right. You've just listened to Dr. Phelps, who had an insightful view of evangelicals and the right. And at the end, he had a prescient message that I am going to cut out and have place for every single Democrat, for every single progressive to listen to. That is extremely important. His final words of the interview. Folks, again, that telephone number to call is 646-716-5812. We still have the blog of the week to get to. We're going to be talking the second part of the program about Inácio Luiz da Silva. Actually, his full name is the former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. And the reason that we're talking about it is a lot of folks don't see the similarities. I want you to start looking at it as similar. And the reason why this is important, folks, is because of the president like Trump, with people or politicians who simply seem to fall in line and fear him, fall in line and do as he says, fall in line and do as he asks. It is important. It is important that we understand what's going on. Before I get to the blog of the week, I think I better go ahead and talk to my folks on the Facebook page, so that and then we'll go into the blog of the week. But if you're just joining us again, folks, as I said before, please go ahead and share this on your page. Very, very, very important. If we are going to get our message out, folks, we have to do our part. We have to be a part of the problem. It is imperative that we don't sit down and wait for somebody else to do it. It's important that we actually do it. And that is where we lack. And as Dr. Phelps had to say, the right is always consistent. They understand that it's a fight. And there are too many times, as he said, what we try to find is middle ground. We're not saying you shouldn't find middle ground. We're not saying you shouldn't compromise. We're not saying that you shouldn't be civil. What we're saying is you should be brave, you should fight, and you should be able to attain what you want. Okay, let's see what I have from my dear listeners. We have Michael Rudnin. This ought to be interesting. Brazilian plutocracy, a topic I literally know nothing about. Well, we're going to talk about that. Daniel Ledo just shared on MySpace. On MySpace? Daniel? Come on, buddy. Daniel Ledo. It sure is nice when you find someone's pseudo-intellectual hack piece that confirms your own bias. No, it's not about finding him. It's about reading a piece that he wrote, and this piece was very factually based. What makes white evangelicals deserving of being singled out from all evangelicals? Well, I think he made a clear point. If you take a look at other evangelicals, they're not working on a nativist platform. They're he's speaking, of course, in the aggregate, and he specified that as well. He said, when he says white evangelicals, he means most, and that those are the ones who voted for Trump proves his point. So I mean, there's nothing he didn't have to equivocate. All groups power. Whoa, wow. Okay, Michael Rodnan says white evangelicals are losing power in our country. If we let me continue. He says white evangelicals are losing power in our country. If Trump didn't face Clinton, the worst Democratic candidate in modern history, he would have lost. We had the worst voter turnout in 2016, largely because Clinton couldn't bring the enthusiasm to the populace, running as an establishment candidate in a year when people wanted anything but an establishment candidate. I think you hit that on the money, and that was, Personally, I supported Hillary Clinton 100%. I blogged for her 100% after Bernie, that is. After Bernie was no longer, when we were sure Bernie was no longer going to be the candidate, I then went to support the appropriate candidate, the most progressive candidate, as I promised I would do. As I promised all my donors that sent me to the convention, I said, look, folks, I am in for progressives winning, period. I want you to support me for going to support Bernie. Those are the values that I believe in. Next to those values that I believe in would be the ones that I can support, and those were the ones from the establishment, of course, Hillary Clinton. Definitely not Donald Trump, and I did my part, and I think many Americans did their part. In fact, do remember that Hillary won the popular vote. Whenever you hear Donald Trump won the election, remember, he won because of an aberration within the Constitution that says the Electoral College is how the president is elected, and each state decides what their portions are. And because they decide what their portions are, they have most states have a all or nothing, which means if you win the state, you get all the votes. There are a few states. I think one is New Hampshire, maybe one of them. Two states, I believe, that they are proportional in the way it's which whoever wins a particular district gets the particular the particular electoral college vote. All right, let's see. We have Michael Rudden says, no, you can label conservative Christians. They just won't care. They're blind to their own hypocrisy. Yeah, but I think what the professor had to say is very important. And I think as progressives, we have to understand that. We have to instantiate that within ourselves and act accordingly. In other words, these guys biblically are not far off from certain books in their own Bible. Okay? So therefore, the support, as he gave the example, the support of Trump is no different than, let's say, the support of Samson, Samson's in the Bible. So we have to change. We can't just say our belief in Christianity right now is that it's this stuff of love only and taking good care of folks and so forth. What I loved about the doctor's piece is that he said, look, let's grow up. Let's grow up. We cannot sit back and just believe that because we tell these guys they're hypocrites, because we tell them they're not loving, that somehow they think that's not biblical, because clearly, based on several books in the Bible, it is pretty, there are certain, and he didn't like when I said there are certain evils that are in fact biblical, but that's how I put it. There are certain evils within the Bible that are in fact biblical. Okay, Nisha says, I can't imagine what rock this dude living under thinking that we aren't taking Trump and his supporters seriously. My good friend, he's probably from under the same rock that I am. Nisha, one of the premier activists in the country, fighting against the system. For you and the folks that you're hanging with, you guys, there's nobody that wants to get rid of Trump, and there's nobody fighting harder to get rid of Trump as you guys are. But the professor, my dear friend, is right. Too many, specifically within the establishment Democratic Party, are doing exactly what he said. And at the end, his statement at the end, I think, is the most important of them all. And I beg that all of those that are listening to the program right now, or those that are going to listen to the vlogcast or the blogcast later on, to please, 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 please listen to what the man had to say. What the man had to say was very important. But folks, I think we need to go ahead and move on with the program. And you know what? Do you know? Let me make sure I'm ready first. Do you know what time it is? And I am not sure that I know what time it is. There we go. Do you know what time it is? And I'm going to tell you what time it is.
It's time for the weekly blog post.
Okay, folks. First of all, I want to tell those folks that are listening right now, if you're listening to the program right now, please go ahead and share it on your wall so that we can go ahead and ensure that that we get maximum throughput on Facebook, given the new algorithm. It's very, very important that we share these programs and make sure that that listenership goes up on these types of programs. Today, we're going to talk about what has occurred to the Brazilian president, ex-president, that is, former president. But let me start by reading something. The blog of the week was written by a guest writer. Specifically, it was written by Leonardo Boff. Leonardo Boff is a independent writer who sends me pieces every so often that he wants publicized, because again, it's usually well researched. Before I publish anything from folks, I try to fact check it, and this was, of course, what I did with this. I've been following Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for a long time. Anyhow, the title of the article is Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the charismatic leader, servant of the people. Every society reinforces its identity with great symbols that provide clarity and direction. These symbols are found in special moments such as El Cristo del Corcovado, in an entire city, such as Brasilia, in the images of Alejandrino prophets, the statues that adorn the public squares and other locations. Street names evoke the memory of writers, poets, artists, figures, squares, and other locations. Street names evoke the memory of writers, poets, artists, figures lodged in the collective consciousness. In the political world, Getulio Vargas' predominance cannot be denied. He is one of the greatest political leaders in our history who gave Brazil a new direction and brought her into the modern world, particularly benefiting the working class. Folks, if you hear that this program now, we've migrated from our evangelicals into Brazil. And one of the problems we have in America is we don't much know, or we don't know much about other countries and how the behavior of people in those countries do nothing more than mimic the behavior that people all over the world, including the United States. So I ask you, for those of us who are insular to thinking, well, this isn't going to cover Donald Trump or America or whatever, let's look at the parallelisms. Let's look at the realities and try to absorb not only that which is American, but that which is international, because we are now in that type of a world. But continuing the blog. The figure of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva belongs in this line. No one can deny his charisma, recognized in Brazil and around the world. The strength of his charisma lies in that he comes from the forgotten classes, abandoned by the elites, who have always controlled the state with policies that only benefited the elites, always against the Brazilian people. The elites never had a program for Brazil. They only looked after their own well-being. Suddenly, Lula emerged on the Brazilian political scene, endowed with an exceptional charisma and representing the victims of the Brazilian tragedy, characterized by the world's greatest social inequality, injustice. Even though he was forced to accept the logic of the pervasive capitalist economy, exclusive and therefore anti-democratic by nature, Lula managed to open paths that benefited millions of Brazilians, starting with the program Hambre Zero, Zero Hunger Program, and followed by several other policies. I want to pause here and remind folks, in effect, that was what we expected out of Barack Obama. We didn't expect Barack Obama to destroy capitalism as the right of always talked about. We expected him to mitigate capitalism. That is, we know the evils that lie within the selfishness within capitalism, but with policies passed, we could mitigate some of those evils. And, you know, the Affordable Care Act and several other bills that were passed did do some of that. Not enough, but it did do some of that. And the expectation was that whenever we got a progressive president, a real progressive president, that would continue. And why do we know that that would be successful? Because when we ask Americans at large the policies that they want are always the progressive policies pushed by progressives, not by the establishment Republicans or establishment liberals, but by progressives. These are the policies that Americans say they want. So the idea is to put people into office, not that the establishment says, but that the people want. And you do that, you get folks elected. Continuing with the blog. Those who call him a populist and social worker know nothing about hunger, that Gandhi affirmed is an insult because hunger humiliates, dehumanizes, and destroys body and spirit. Hunger is the worst murderer that exists. Whenever anyone is done to benefit the needy, whenever anything is done to benefit the neediest, the wealthy elites and their allies criticize it as populism by do-gooders. If they cannot use the poor for their political ends, they forget what is basic in any society that is minimally civilized. That is, the first task of the government is to guarantee and protect the life of the people, and to not force them into the exclusion and misery that victimizes the children and makes them face an early death. The wave of hatred and slander that arises in the country is born of the spirit of the heirs of La Casa Grande. Their former contempt for the slaves is now directed at the poor, the blacks, especially poor black and other women. So you see, the problem isn't only here in the United States, but it also occurs in Brazil, the part of America that has, like, believe it or not, the largest black population is not in the United States. It is outside the United States, specifically Brazil. Now, with with his inclusive programs, Lula not only satisfied the hunger and other needs of some 40 million people, he returned to them that which is most important. And what is that, folks? Their dignity and the awareness that they are citizens and the sons and daughters of God. The true leader serves a cause that goes far beyond himself. The son of northern poverty, Lula offered himself as president so that no Brazilian would go hungry. How many times I personally heard him say that the sole meaning of his life and his politics was to give centrally to the poor and extract them from the hell of poverty. Once coming with him in a car from San Bernardo, passing through a lonely place, Lula had the car stop and confessed to me, many times, leaving the factory, I would sit here on this grass and cry because I had nothing to take to my brothers who were at home hungry. Lula, as head of state, wanted to create the conditions so that no one would have to cry for hunger. Lula was and is the leader who serves this cause, a charismatic leader who speaks to people's core. Hence is born the enthusiasm and the attraction that all leaders elicit. How many times in my walks by the communities of the periphery, I hear this phrase, Lula was the only one who thought of us, the poor, and did good things for us. He has limitations that are part of the human condition and has even made political mistakes, but never could be said that he abandoned the basic purpose of his life and his political action. This can be seen in fact that he always spent Christmas with the mendicants who are cared for by Padre Julio Lancelotti under a bridge in Sao Paulo. There he could be with his brothers and sisters of destiny and show them solidarity and companionship. The viciousness of those who want a Brazil with privileges for the few has managed to throw him in jail. Yes, he's in jail now. But the dream of a Brazil that is rich because she does not have people living in misery can never be jailed. Lula, with his dream, is immortal, and he is, as in the Jewish tradition put it, a man of justice among nations. These few examples show how someone can be a political leader who serves the people and arouses in them the same spirit of solidarity and constructive service. This attitude speaks of a different Brazil, one that we want and deserve, encouraged by representatives who make of politics, as Gandhi said, a loving gesture towards the people and a caring for all that is common. Lula belongs in the honorable tradition. Lula belongs in that honorable tradition. Folks, we tend in America not to concentrate on foreign leaders except if something bad is happening in the country, except if somehow they're going against the fiscal policy or the economic policies of the United States. When it comes to when it comes to our friend Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, what has always been the case is, first of all, when he came into power, there was fear because they thought Brazilian capitalism was dead. Instead, he didn't kill it. He made a better economy. He made an economy that partially worked on capitalism, for the few that benefited for that and created things with that. But he also made sure that the economy worked for the people. He made sure that there were policies that reminded folks that, first of all, more importantly, what we are human beings, and human beings have needs, and there's no need for society if your government, that which was created by society, if that doesn't serve the people, why have it? And he made it clear as well that it is the people that make the capitalists successful. And you hear me preach that day in, day out, day in, day out. Lula da Silva never finished high school. Lula da Silva said when he went into the presidency, he had to be successful. And he said he had to be successful because everybody would say, if he was not successful as president of Brazil, that after all, there's something different about the working class than anybody else. And what he proved is that the presidency and leadership does not belong to the elite or only the elite who were able to afford colleges and the best in life, but everybody or anybody who wants to govern and or that are willing to work towards governing, that are willing to make life better for somebody else, can do it. We also proved that you can go to an elite college and still be very, very unsuccessful from a business point of view and unsuccessful from a governing point of view. And for that, we simply have to look at the White House and understand that there is much more to governing than where you've been to school. Folks, the telephone number is 646-716-5812. Again, that number is 646-716-5812. I would love for you to add to the program. Do you want to add anything to what we spoke about in Brazil? We have a tendency, as I said, in this country to discount anything that occurs outside of the world. But let me tell you what they've done to Lula. The first thing that the Plutocracy did, first of all, for 12 consecutive years, I should say, 8 under Lula and a few under Dilma Rousseff, there was a left-wing government in Brazil, a government that took care of its people, a government that didn't only care about the economy, but also cared about people. They found technicalities to get rid, to oust, to overthrow Dilma Rousseff, who was the understudy for Lula while he was president for 8 years. Before that occurred, however, they knew that Lula would run again for president. He could go 8 consecutive years, pause, go again. They knew that. So they wanted to make sure that the plan was to get rid of Dilma Rousseff as well as to criminalize Lula. Well, Dilma Rousseff was very smart at that time. What she did is she brought Lula as her chief of staff. By bringing Lula as her chief of staff, the law in Brazil meant that the only people who could convict or punish anybody that's in the government, there's 700 plus people that I think served in the government that only the Supreme Court can somehow judge. They cannot fall under the purview of the standard legal system. So she protected him in that manner. But what they did is they pretty much impeached Dilma Rousseff. In the process, of course, that left Lula open. And Lula got convicted, and it sounds kind of silly. For somebody who controlled Brazil, the biggest economy in the southern hemisphere, a huge economy that it rivals any of the big economies in the world. And they produce everything. They produce nuclear weapons. They produce, they don't tell you that, of course. They produce a lot of jets, military. They're just a whole, they're like a mini United States as far as being able to produce products, to produce things. They're a big country because of who we are as Americans. We only think of the big producers as United States, Germany, France, and Great Britain, or Japan. We don't think about the folks south of us that really have power. Brazil, a real economic powerhouse. And that was the biggest economic powerhouse under the guidance of a real left-wing government, a real government of the left that really cared about people. It was the only true capitalist country, capitalist with a little c, because he mitigated the capitalism within the country to ensure that his people were taken care of. It was the only country. And you know what? The plutocracies around the world cannot let that stand. They just can't let that stand. And the reason they can't let that stand is it may spread like a cancer. And what happens when it hit Argentina, Chile? What happens when it hit all the other major economies in the South? What happens when it hits, well, you know, Argentina was under a left-wing government as well, and they just got taken over by a right-wing government. I wonder why you cripple the left-wing governments, and that's what happens, you know. I have some stories I can tell you about Hugo Chavez as well, as far as why there are all those shortages that that now Maduro is seeing. Why do I like to bring up these international stories, if you will? It is important for us to understand this, to understand why America is the way America is and where America is going, and how America is ultimately controlling what we do as progressives, those that are progressives, that is, how they're trying to control your success, because to them, progressives present an existential danger to them. There's a recent article in the New York Times that spoke about the differences between progressives and liberals. They could have just said, if they really wanted to be honest, they could just say liberals are sellouts and progressives are dreamers. They could have said that the way the article was written. In other words, progressives are only, you know, progressives are absolutists. Progressives say we have to be good and we have to do things in a particular manner. Liberals say, okay, we can compromise and we... Is that true? Is that true? 646-716-5812. Folks, give us a call. 646-716-5812. Would love to hear from you, but in the interim, let me go back to our, see what else we have written on our walls. Not to leave my my Facebook wall folks alone. I will go ahead and see what's new on the wall. Okay, come on, wall. Let's see what you're saying, my dear friends, my dear listeners. Let's see what you're saying. Come on, hurry up. It's coming. All right. Let's see if that's good enough. Michael Run says, okay, he was answering Mike Cesek, so I better go before that one. As soon as it filters up and fills up. We're going to have to talk to Facebook about having a more efficient page, because they make it very difficult to go through at times. Okay, Egberto, do you see the memes I post? HM, I see the thumbnails. Anyone else? Yeah, I can see the memes that you're posting with the graphs. In other countries, people enjoy better healthcare at lower costs. Yes, I saw that meme. Let's see. On my phone, they just are hyperlinks. Would you have to click? Okay, no, we actually saw the memes. Americans want living wages, healthcare, and ending the wars. I think those are top three. We'll check after the video. Okay, Mike Cesek. Yes, socialist policies deny people's rights and make the vast majority poor. Okay, you've made a statement. Back it up. Mike Cesek, you've made a statement. Back it up. And you can call, please, 646-716-5812. I want to debate that with you. You know, it's easy to write those words down on the screen, my dear friend. Very easy to say that. But back it up. You said that makes people poorer. How? Numerically, how does that work? From a mathematical standpoint, give me the numbers to show me how that works. I can give you the numbers to show you how it makes no sense to assume that a top-heavy economy where 1% of the people control most of the capital leads to a depressed economy. I can prove that, and not only can I prove that from a mathematical standpoint, evidentiary, it has been proven. So please, my dear friend, if you have evidence, come on, I'm sure my people here would love to hear that. Okay, Michael Rudden. CSAC not going the poverty while working full-time is a socialist issue. Huh. Okay, so people of Venezuela who are suffering under a socialist government would say differently. I try to explain that before. I try to explain how a plutocracy works. All right? They are not going, or they try their best to disallow social programs in these countries, just like they do in the United States. And if for some reason they vote somebody in, like they voted Lula or they vote in Chavez, because the plutocracy, the capitalists, those who run the capitalist economy, are the ones in control of the means of production. Remember, always people talk about, oh, communism is the state controls the means of production, or socialism. They like to also say that the state controls the means of production. That's not true. There's a difference between communism and socialism. There's no way that I'll touch communism because, in my opinion, that is central thinking. I believe in individual thinking, individual liberties. I believe in free enterprise. The socialist part that I believe in specifically or things that are of absolute value and necessity to Americans, okay? And that is where we go. I see I got a call, so I'll shut up for a while just to give my caller some time. Okay, caller, you are from 573. Come on in, my friend.
Yeah, that's Mike Cisak.
Mike Cisak.
I'd give you a call finally.
I love you that you gave me a call. Make your point. Make
How's
your point,
it
my
going?
brother.
Well, basically, I've been doing some research on this, and basically, that statement that I've put forward is true whenever you actually look at any version of socialism around the world.
Okay. Let me ask you a question.
You know, and that.
Okay.
All right, just yeah. So.
Did you want to finish before I ask a question? Because I don't want to interrupt you.
No, basically, and that's really, you know, basically what I found out. I mean, you know, there is an ideal. I know you always put forth an ideal, and it's like, you know, this, that, and everything else. But, you know, a lot of times what you have to do is you actually have to take, you know, what is reality out there. Every single country that I've, you know, looked at, that's a result.
Okay, let me
Everyone
give you.
becomes more poor.
That's fine. I get your point, my dear friend. But let me tell you something, okay? Because what happens is, whenever many on the right try to use the word socialism and then give examples to Americans of failure, they'll go to Venezuela. They'll go to how China used to be. Because remember, China is one of the biggest capitalist countries now. They'll go to all these countries that had other issues to speak about. So let me school you on a few things. Canada is a socialist country. Okay. Now it has. It's
a welfare state.
It's a socialist country. There's not a difference. Socialist simply means that you have all these social programs, and the thing that confuses a whole lot of people is they'll look at a socialist country. They look socialism up in the dictionary, and then they look communism up in the dictionary. I'll challenge everybody to do it, and you'll see the same definition. The government controls all means of production. That is not true at all. That's true for communism. It's not true for socialism. For a democratic socialist state, that's not true. Denmark is the most effective democratic socialist state. It has a higher productivity rate than the United States, and one of the reasons it has the highest higher productivity rates and other rates than the United States are simple, because its people are taken care of, and if you take care of people, you can actually get things done better. But it is true that it has a high tax rate for everybody, not only for the middle class. It's in America, the people with that very high tax rates are the middle class. The rich people don't pay a lot of taxes because they have all your monies invested, which they pay capital gains. A completely unfair thing, something that says that if you work with your hands, you can pay up to 39% or now 37% of your income in taxes. If you're a rich person, you will only have to pay about 25%, 22% maximum in taxes. Now, we are skewed completely towards systemic income inequality, and it's because it is not a state based on socialist principles. So, as an example, Canada is, Germany is, France is, Great Britain is, Denmark is, and the reason they weathered the storm much better than we did is simply for those reasons, the Keynesian reasons. Continue.
I think it's Denmark. The leader, I think it was Denmark. Anyway, one of the many Scandinavian countries there was complaining that, like Bernie Sanders, saying that they were Democrat socialist countries. And he was complaining because he said, no, they're not. They're very market-oriented, which is true. I actually looked it up. They're more free market than the U.S. is.
Yes.
He said they have they just have a large welfare state.
Okay, I got to stop you there.
Which is not...
Mike, I really, because we don't have much time left, so I need to stop you right there. And here's the thing, Mike.
Here's the quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Here's a quick challenge, just 20 seconds.
Yes.
I basically, if everyone looks it up, okay, as far as these countries that you claim all socialist countries and stuff, look back before they actually adopted all of these socialist type, social welfare programs.
Sure.
And see how well they were actually doing prior to that. Denmark, Scandinavian countries were extremely wealthy before they started taking up all these socialist policies.
I'm not going to disagree.
And everyone was doing a lot better than they are now.
Let me tell you, no.
Like I said, that's one thing a lot of people ought to look up.
That's not true. Everyone was not doing better. What you had was a skew of the wealth as well. I mean, so we have to be, if we're going to speak the truth to our audience, we have to be truthful. First of all, I agree with you. I agree with you that it is true that a whole lot of people did better. I agree with you that these countries were are previously wealthy. I mean, we have Norway, who has all the oil from the North Sea and so forth. Those are real truths. But we also have Venezuela, who has a lot more oil than Norway does and is doing poorly, mostly because of an elite that believed in pure capitalism. But let's forget that aside, and let me tackle one issue that you're talking about with how these guys were rich already. Fine, I agree with you; they're rich already. So, what I want people to stop believing is that economic systems are immutable, right? I want folks to look at an economic system and say, well, it worked to reach a certain goal now. Let's go ahead and change it to attain something else. Right now, our economic system in America is it's pretty much a religion. And what I want to do is forget about an economy as a religion and think of economy as people first. Okay, and if it means that, once a person said, if it wasn't for capitalism and you live in Houston, you live downtown Houston and you have all those big, tall skyscrapers and all those big houses in Memorial and all of that, to which I didn't give an answer. One of my audience gave the answer and they said, yeah, but those are places 99% of the people who live in Houston cannot go to. So I mean, it doesn't matter to me that the wealthy is going to do a whole lot less wealthy. In fact, they don't work enough as I see it as right now for the wealth that they have. But it doesn't bother me that the wealthy will have less. It bothers me that those who do the work don't have enough. And that's who I fight for. I fight for those who do the work.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And I think, I think, Mike, in listening to you, I honestly think at some time I will be able to hit that switch in your head that we are more on the same level than you think. Because I think if I ever make that point to you objectively, that in fact we are working to make things better for people, but capitalism in the raw form cannot, and that what we need is, if we're going to maintain a capitalist state, we will use capitalism simply as a tool in our toolbox, meaning where we need to have public hospitals, we will. Where we need to have socialized medicine, we will. Socialized power, we will. Socialized energy, we will. Those are the things that we have to talk about. But anyhow, we're at the end of the show, Mr. Cisak. Look, first of all, I want to thank you.
It was good talking to you.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure speaking to you as well. You keep calling and let's keep talking, all right?
Okay.
Thank you, my brother. Anyway, folks, we are coming up to the end of the show. I would like to remind you that this is a progressive show. I'd like to remind you that we need your support. Please go to patreon.com/politicsdoneright. That is patreon.com/politicsdoneright. Be sure to become a contributor. Be sure to become a subscriber. We need hundreds of you to maintain or to remain viable. It is you who are going to ensure that we can continue to promote messages, promote narratives, promote policy that can enlighten folks, so that when they go to vote in November 2018, when they go to vote in 2019, when they go to vote in 2020, that they do so from an educated point of view. It is so important that we have your support. The right, as Dr. Phelps said earlier, the right supports their policies completely. They support it with their bodies. They support it with their financing. They support it with they just support their people who are making sure this goes out. We need that type of support from you as well. So please give us go ahead and become a subscriber at patreon.com/politicsdoneright. That's patreon.com/politicsdoneright. Folks, you have a wonderful rest of the day. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right, and I am, you know what? Out.
Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is the progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. Remember, you can also send me a tweet to EGBERTOWILLIES, that is, at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.
1, 2, 3, 4.